Hey guys, a while back I made a video about my Kitty Kat clone, which was a fairly passable reproduction of a DPMS RFA2 Kitty Kat. So, 7.5-inch barrel, fixed front sight base, and a fixed A2 style carry handle. I've had a low-level obsession with the DPMS Kitty Kat ever since I saw an airsoft version of it as a kid. Now I finally have my hands on a true DPMS Kitty Kat. These are new production guns from DPMS that are very faithful to the classic configuration of the Kitty Kat that people are most familiar with and probably find most desirable. So we're going to talk about this gun today, and we're also going to talk about the modernized Kitty Kat clone concept that people keep asking me about, because I think there might be more to it than you think. Before we talk about the Kitty Kat, we should start with a history lesson about DPMS. A guy by the name of Randy Luth started DPMS Panther Arms in 1986 to make various small parts on contract for other companies, and in the 90s they also became fairly well known for making their own ARs. In the mid-2000s, the Cerberus Investment Group bought up several major gun companies, including DPMS, Remington, Marlin, and Bushmaster, and rolled them all into one parent brand called Freedom Group. In a shocking twist, the private equity firm named after the three-headed mongrel that guards the gates of hell performed a ruthless piece of financial engineering that nearly killed all of these companies. In essence, the Cerberus Group used Remington to borrow a bunch of money and used the money to pay itself back for what it spent acquiring Remington, leaving Cerberus with a huge pile of free money and leaving Freedom Group with an enormous debt. When Donald Trump got elected in 2016, gun sales cratered, and it was suddenly impossible for Remington to make enough money to pay off that debt. The Freedom Group declared its inevitable bankruptcy in 2020, and all of these gun brands got auctioned off. Palmetto State Armory bought a few of them, including DPMS. Bushmaster got picked up by Franklin Armory. But even before 2020, DPMS and Bushmaster weren't the same companies they were in the 90s, and there weren't a lot of fond memories left. When DPMS was originally brought out in 2007, the founder, Randy Luth, went off to start another company called Luth AR, which until recently was one of very few companies actually doing retro AR stuff. A similar thing happened with Bushmaster. Since 2011, savvy gun guys have known that the true Bushmaster is actually Wyndham weaponry. One of the other brands PSA acquired in 2020 was Harrington and Richardson, which at that point hadn't even been producing firearms for several years. So what were they supposed to do with these legacy brand names that no longer had real companies attached to them? Enter Nodak Spud. Nodak Spud is a company owned by a guy named Mike Wetland, and they were the other big player in the retro AR scene pretty much alongside Luth AR. Nodak Spud, NDS, had all of the forgings to make carry handle retro style AR uppers and different patterns of AR lowers. So for a while, if you bought one of the Brownells retro guns, you would see the NDS mark on the receivers because those were being made for Brownells by Nodak Spud. So PSA went to Nodak Spud and offered to buy them out, and they combined them with their trademark for Harrington and Richardson to create their entire lineup of H&R retro ARs. And I suspect that Nodak Spud and Mike Wetland had a lot to do with adding back the Kitty Kat to the DPMS lineup. I think they first teased this thing at SHOT Show maybe like 2 years ago, and ever since then, every time they post it on Instagram, people tag me in the comments saying, "Hey, have you seen this?" Yes, I have in fact seen it, and now I have it. So let's take a closer look at it. So what we have here is an almost perfect reproduction of the DPMS RFA1 Kitty Kat. Kitty Kat was the name that they used for their extremely short ARs, so 7.5-inch barrel, originally in 5.56 because back then 300 Blackout did not exist. But they kept using the name Kitty Kat to refer to all of their short-barreled guns. It does not specifically mean fixed front sight base and fixed carry handle. They had a whole bunch of different versions. So there was the RFA1, which is this one, which has the A1 or C7 style upper receiver. There was the RFA2, which had the A2 style upper receiver, still kept the fixed front sight base. And then there was the RFA3, which was a flat top, because again, maybe this is DPMS's fault. Back then, people called the flat top ARs A3s to differentiate them from A2s, which were carry handles, not an M16A3. In the end, before they retired the Kitty Kat name, DPMS was making essentially a modernized Kitty Kat. So flat top upper receiver and full length free float handguard, no front sight base. But this is the A1. Certainly this is the most classic version, probably the most widely sought after, because people really do love this aesthetic of the A1 or C7 style upper. Alright, so let's start with the receiver set. The lower has nothing going on whatsoever, just a standard AR lower. The upper is the A1 or C7 style upper, so it does not have the more complicated A2 rear sight. It's got the classic A1 style, but it does have the forward assist. The barrels on these are 7.5 inches long, and at least on the RFA 1s, these are actually a pencil weight barrel. So this is a .625 gas block journal with a pinned front sight base rather than .750, which they may have used starting with the RFA 2s, or that may just be a detail that a lot of the clones get wrong. The handguards on the Kitty Cats are simple aluminum tubes with some nice knurling around the middle to give you something to hold on to. These are actually free float. They have a timed barrel nut, which is always annoying to install. You'd have to get the hole lined up so that the gas tube can pass through. And then the aluminum tube is just threaded on from the front before the front sight base is installed. On a lot of these, you can actually just start unscrewing the handguard if you put enough force on it. It can't really go anywhere because it's held in place by the front sight base, and I'm sure you could slather this in Loctite or something if you really didn't want it to go anywhere, but enough torque and it'll stay in place. Use a strap wrench if you have to. These guns ship from DPMS with A2 birdcage flash hiders on them. I swapped mine out for a Reardon R2S flash hider so that we could suppress this thing. Turns out that the Otter Creek Labs Polonium K is rated down to 7.5 inch barrels in 5.56. That thing is a tank, so we did shoot it suppressed, and it is pretty cool. Lower is about as standard as it could possibly get. We have an A2 grip, standard trigger guard, mil-spec style fire control group, mil-spec style non-ambidextrous controls. We have a carbine buffer tube with a carbine spring, and I believe a 3-ounce carbine buffer. I'll show on screen if I'm wrong about the weight. The brace this ships with is the retro car style brace that H&R uses on a lot of their pistol builds. When I saw pictures of this, I thought it'd be really flimsy and not enjoyable to shoot with at all, but it turns out it actually locks up pretty solid on the buffer tube. Really not bad at all, and most importantly, it matches the aesthetics of the gun. Sure, an SBA3 would be more comfortable, but it would also be very ugly, so yeah, leave it like this. It's tempting to think of the Kitty Kat as purely a range toy, and it certainly is that. However, there actually was some serious interest in 7.5 ARs from military and maybe law enforcement agencies a lot later than maybe you'd expect. Today's video is brought to you by our channel sponsor, Venture Surplus. Military surplus means different things to different people. For some, it's a source of durable yet inexpensive tactical and outdoor gear and clothing. For others, it's a source of outsider fashion. For many, it's a source of high caloric density snacks with funny names. Whatever you're into, I'm not here to judge, but Venture Surplus may have something you'd be interested in. Check them out at the link in the video description and use the code provided to save 10% off your order. And make sure you check back often because there's always something interesting in the catalog. Thank you to Venture Surplus for sponsoring this channel. Thank you guys for watching. Let's get back into the video. It's common knowledge that the DPMS Kitty Kat was intended for use by SWAT entry teams. I don't know if it's true, but it is commonly known. We tend to think that the kind of person who buys a 7.5 inch AR in 5.56 is the kind of person that shows up to an indoor range and makes the staff there really nervous. But 30 years ago, before pistol braces were a thing, the Kitty Kat would have had almost no appeal to the commercial market. The idea of using a super short AR in 5.56 for extremely close quarters engagements does make sense in a weird way. The short overall length makes the Kitty Kat more maneuverable in tight spaces, and because it's so light and short, it can easily be used with one hand, leaving the other hand free to open doors, handle suspects, or hold a ballistic shield. Police departments can also get ready access to 9mm submachine guns, so what reason would they have to take a 7.5 inch AR over, for example, an MP5? Well, there kind of isn't any reason not to. Muzzle velocity of 55 grain ball ammo from a 7.5 inch barrel is approximately 2,300 feet per second, which is below the reliable fragmentation threshold of 2,500 feet per second. At across-the-room distances, it should still be in the velocity envelope where we expect to see the fabled hydrostatic shock, and it should still yaw and tumble in the target. It will also have significantly more muzzle energy than 9mm. Now, muzzle energy does not correlate directly to terminal effectiveness, but it is an indicator of how much damage could be done if the bullet does the right thing upon entering the target. At close range, we can expect 5.56 to do a lot more damage than 9mm. 9mm, even with the severely compromised muzzle velocity. As far as longer range performance goes, there will be a point at which 5.56 just ice picks a little hole in the target, and there will also be a point at which 9mm hollow points no longer have enough velocity to expand. At these distances, a 9mm would theoretically do more damage because it would simply poke a slightly larger hole. But for across the room distances, 5.56 from a short barrel will still make the bad guy explode and or die. But you don't have to take my word for it because I also asked a professional bullet science person. The DPMS Kitty Kat is therefore smaller, lighter, easier to use, and more lethal than an MP5. The big downside is muzzle blast because most of your powder is burning outside the gun. But hey, free flashbang included with every shot. And look, there are some legit operators who say that's a real phenomenon, and there are others who say it's not. Who am I to argue with competing pedigrees? You're probably already thinking it, but I'll say it for you. Why not just go with 300 Blackout? Supersonic 300 Blackout has substantially more energy than 9mm or 5.56 in a 7.5-inch barrel. The cartridge is also better optimized for short barrels, so less of your powder is being wasted on fire and fury. Well, if you're buying a Kitty Kat for practical purposes, you would be better off with a 300 Blackout version, and DPMS makes one of those that's identical in every other respect to the 5.56 version they sent me. Actually, I think they sent these things out to everybody. If you were actually concerned about practicality, you wouldn't be shopping for a retro fixed carry handle AR in the first place, so just let it be a fun toy. In the heyday of the DPMS Kitty Kat, 300 Blackout didn't exist, and even if it did, I don't think it would have moved the needle much. One of the big selling points of the original Kitty Kat is that it uses the cartridge you already have. Military and police agencies have plenty of 9mm and 5.56 in the supply chain. Adding a new caliber to the pipeline just to feed a gun with a niche application is not cost effective. I think this explains why there were so many 7.5-inch AR PDW projects all active at around the same time, well into the 2000s. Sig Sauer made a 7.5-inch version of the 5.16. It was the only barrel length of 5.16 that used a different handguard and gas system, so that extra work must have been worth it to somebody. Adams Arms also used to make a 7.5-inch piston AR, and apparently those were trialed by Special Forces. Jeff Gerwich posted on Instagram about it. For many years, Noveske has also made a shorty AR PDW called the Diplomat, and when I was setting out to build a modernized Kitty Kat, I actually based it more off the Noveske Diplomat than anything else. So this is my modern Kitty Kat build. More like 10 years ago modern. Probably could have gone a little bit more current with it, but this was still fun to do. This is still a 7.5-inch barreled AR chambered in 5.56. However, we've gone with a full-length free float handguard, so we actually have the rail estate to mount accessories, and that's it. Sure, we could run this thing suppressed. However, I think that kind of defeats the purpose of the ultra-short PDW style or entry style AR. Keeping this thing as short as possible. However, I did put a Noveske KX3 Flaming Pig on the end to tame the concussion. Oh, God. I think a lot of guys misunderstand what the Noveske Flaming Pig muzzle devices are for and what they do. This is not a flash can. There's actually a single baffle in here that's supposed to cut down on concussion and flash. Despite being called the Flaming Pig and having this big old flame shooting out the pig's mouth in the logo, these don't actually flash that much. Even on a 7.5 AR, we don't get fireballs. We get a little bit of sparking and like a faint jet of flame. The other thing the Flaming Pig does is increase back pressure because of that single baffle in there, kind of like a suppressor would, although not to nearly the same extent. A lot of guys put these on undergassed guns to add a little bit of back pressure and make them more reliable. That should not be needed on a 7.5-inch barrel with a pistol-length gas system because there is adequate dwell time here. So I am just using this thing to cut down on concussion. At least to the shooter, this is a surprisingly pleasant gun to shoot. I know, 7.5-inch barrel, 5.56. You think this thing would be a boomer, but it is not. If you're behind it, it's actually quite pleasant thanks to the single baffle of the Flaming Pig.
The concussinator. Not bad. Like being behind it, this is like a normal rifle. It's fucking ass from up front.
7.5-inch barrel with a pistol-length gas system and a Noveske Flaming Pig means that we actually have enough back pressure that I stepped this thing up to an H3 buffer and a Springco Blue spring, and it still runs great. So clearly, gassing is not a problem. The way that I have this thing set up is with the classic Larry Vickers config. So we've got a Surefire X300 pistol light mounted upside down on the top rail, directly in front of a fixed front iron sight. Larry Vickers did this. It's actually pretty clever if you ask me. You have really surprisingly good switch access to a pistol light up on top rail if you're using the Surefire style. Push forward for momentary, or you can rock the switch for constant. And then the little cutout that would fit into the pistol trigger guard just so happens to nestle up pretty nicely up against a front sight. Larry Vickers used Scalarworks iron sights because he's wealthy and sponsored by Scalarworks. I use Midwest Industries because I'm poor. And even though Midwest Industries hates my guts, I still buy a lot of their products. Look, one of their rails. Optic is a vintage L3 era EOTech XPS 2-1. I know, 2 Series EOTech, absolute height EOTech. Go ahead and crucify me. I deserve it for ignoring my own advice. And then we've also got the Midwest Industries fixed combat rear on here. Because again, that was surprisingly popular, like 10 or more years ago, to have a set of fixed iron sights that absolute co-witness through your red dot. It is a miserable shooting experience because you're occluding pretty much the entire window of the optic with iron. But I guess you do have immediate ready access to those backups in case your optic goes down. Obviously, I would much rather have a flip up on the rear, but whatever, it's aesthetic. Anyway, I guess that's the whole show. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, check out the links in the video description. If you join Subscribestar, you get access to early videos, bonus podcast clips between me and Mr. Brassfax. You can go into the Discord and absolutely lose your mind because that place is a nightmare. And yeah, I guess that's about it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. I'll see you guys next time.
Okay, sorry.